Good evening from Rhode Island to our program. This program is in collaboration with the Chamber of Commerce of Newport, the Consulate General of Israel to New England, Israel Economic Mission to North America. I'm very happy that we will be able to talk about Israel and Rhode Island affairs. And we have guest speaker. We'll start first with Inon Elroy, Israel Economic Minister of Israel in New York. And then after that, we'll have Dr. Nir Tsuk from Israel. He's in Israel at midnight there. He will be on the program on a quarterly basis with me. And then we'll have Tobias Stapleton from Newport. We'll talk about Rhode Island innovation in the Newport area. Again, we are very happy that the relation between Israel and Rhode Island in business, economic, and research are growing. An example of some projects that's going on, we're going to have in March a virtual trade mission to Israel from Rhode Island. We started the RIIC project where we work with the Hispanic community. We're training Hispanic students, and they match them with small Hispanic businesses here, and they will develop for them a web page, so they have digital presence. And we also are involved with that another Israeli company called Click2, which is a platform for training. Another company, it's Solo. It's by a program that's called Solo. By two together, they're doing a clinical research with Brown University. And Gate Better just was connected with Rhode Island Hospital, with the neuroscience department. And they will do research again and development together. So there are more projects that's going on, but I think I will transfer it to the Economic Minister to North America, Inon Elroy. Inon.
Thank you very much, Avi. Good evening to you. Good night, Nir and all the other friends in Israel. We're very happy to hear that beside that so many complementarities between the US and Israel, even the snow connect us today. So keep warm and dry. So Avi, great, thank you, great initiative. Thank you so much. Together with the Israeli Consulate in Boston, we consider Rhode Island as a very important partner for Israel. And luckily, Avi, you and your board members launched the Rhode Island Israel Initiative, which has been very active and productive during the recent months. As you mentioned, there's several very interesting projects between Rhode Island and Israel, and as we know you, taking into account, for example, these great initiatives, I'm sure there's so many to come. On general, I wanted to share with the audience some statistics and news that maybe not everybody know, because these are not daily news. The US and Israel celebrate these days 35 years of historical free trade agreement between them. It was signed in 1985 when during that time the bilateral trade volume was about $3.8 billion annually. And not surprisingly, today or in 2019, the numbers were about $47 billion between the US and Israel, both goods and services. In 2018, the FDI of the US to Israel was about $28 billion, which you could imagine quite a lot from the R&D centers and the mergers and acquisitions of so many Israeli companies. But we're not in the case of David and Goliath, and I just remind you that I've said $28 billion came from the US to Israel. If we would have time and have the digital possibility, I would make a survey how much you guys think were the FDI from Israel to the US. So the FDI from Israel to the US was $36 billion at that time, a little bit more than what was from the US to Israel. that includes also real estate and many other perspectives. Another very important element that you would like to take into consideration is a platform that was launched between the two countries, the Bird Foundation. It was initiated in 1977. This is a binational fund which supports the R&D cooperation between US and Israeli companies. Since its inception, there were $360 million which was invested in 1,000 roughly projects, and several of these projects were between Rhode Island and Israeli companies. So there's still quite a lot that we can do in this perspective. And again, I trust you, Avi, and the Rhode Island Initiative to work on that. In addition, Avi, thank you for your support to our discussions with the Department of Commerce of additional synergies and complementarities that we can do together. So I want to greet you all. I'm looking forward to hear the views of Dr. Nir Tsuk and to learn more about Dr. Tobias Stapleton's interesting company. So thank you very much and good luck with this and next episodes.
Thank you, Inon Elroy. And now we'll move to Dr. Nir Tsuk. Nir will give us an overview of innovation and economics in Israel. We purposely designed a very short half-an-hour program. So, Nir, it's all yours. And thank you again for doing it at midnight here in Israel.
Yeah, I mean, at least it doesn't snow in Tel Aviv and the rain has stopped. But thank you for the invitation and opportunity, Avi. And it's a pleasure to be part of this affair, Rhode Island-Israel affair. And I'll try to, in 10 minutes, talk about some of the developments here. We're all repeating the Chinese curse about living in interesting times. Definitely interesting times. I would maybe even go to Charles Dickens and say the best of times, the worst of times. I mean, we know about the worst of times. Israel is now experiencing probably its deepest recession since the 1950s. At the same time, the high-tech industry is doing great. The Israeli currency is getting stronger and stronger. I will try to touch upon some of these things. Again, my name is Nir Tsuk. I'm part of the NYU Bronfman Center, and we've created an Institute for Impact and Entrepreneurship, in which we teach entrepreneurship as a language to the unusual suspects, which is not only business people, but also social workers and mayors and rabbis and high school kids and stuff like that. I will try to talk about several things when I talk about Israel. I'll talk about the forthcoming election. I'll talk about Corona. I'll talk about some interesting exits, and I'll talk about the arrival of Tesla. Now, as you know, Israel is going to have its fourth election over the next, in less than a month. It's going to be the fourth election over 2 years. There is no agreed budget to the country, which makes the whole thing even more, again, we're not allowed to make political comments, right? So I'll say more entrepreneurial than usual. And this happens at one of the severest economic crises. I would like to focus on the optimistic part of this story. And on one hand, more than 4,000 people were tested positive yesterday, which is 6.4% of the tests. On the other hand, more than 50% of the 30 plus people who are older than 30 in Israel were vaccinated. 4 million people were vaccinated at least one shot. 2.7 million people were vaccinated at least got two, which makes Israel, I think, by far the most vaccinated country in the world. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? If you don't believe in the conspiracies against the vaccinations, I would like to say it's a good thing. And some would like to argue that there is something for socialistic or centralized planning of healthcare system that allows the Israeli society, Israeli healthcare companies, and Israeli government to do this thing in a very efficient way. You would probably be happy to know that at least two Israeli companies are dealing not only with vaccinations, but also with medicines. I mean, vaccination is only one part of the story. The real question is, how do you take care of people who already have contracted COVID-19? And two of the largest hospitals in Israel, one is in Tel Aviv, it's called Ichilov, the other one is in Jerusalem, Hadassah. They have teams working on that. Meanwhile, of course, you know, there's the big debate, what's more important, education or commerce, and all the things you experience in other parts of the world. And I think it's time to talk about not only Corona, but what it does to the economy. I mean, we are lucky. Some of the details were published a week ago. Luckily enough, the Israeli GDP has shrunk 2.4%, which is surprisingly low compared to what the OECD is reporting, 5.6. And they're talking about crazier numbers. In France is 8.7, England is 10.4, Spain is 11.4, which is unbelievable. However, if you look at private consumption in Israel, it had shrunk in 11%, which tells you a different story, while the OECD had shrunk in 6.3%. And if you look at, again, depends, I have a complicated relationship with the numbers, right, with statistics. But still, if you try to look at all these numbers, they give you a very clear view of a large increase in government expenditure, a large increase in the deficit, less taxes are being collected. At the same time, and we know it in Israel in various other times, there's a dramatic increase in the export. So if you try to look at the bottom line says this: on one hand, decrease in consumption, increase in unemployment. People are now talking about 15.4% of unemployment. What would the future look like? Depends on the weather, but more so depends on the vaccinations. If we're talking about new mutations, it's a different story. If we're talking about a general decline of the virus or the pandemic, we are hopefully on our way out. The question is the deficit. The question is the unemployment. And of course, another big story is the long-term mental and emotional residue that will affect many in years to come. Let's talk about happier things. Tesla is coming to Israel. And as you know, Tesla, the PR machine is working 24/7, not to say 25/8. It's going to be the first car company which will sell its cars directly in Israel without any importer and other people. They're already shaking the structure of the traditional Israeli car dealing industry. They're offering lower prices. Time will tell what happens, but this is definitely a positive development because it puts us a tiny, how do you call it, Avi? Little state, big development. Our little country is on the Tesla map, and who knows, the sky is the limit. Talking about happier things, we are happy to report that there were at least 3 major exits during Corona time, which again shows you that the Israeli high-tech is thriving either against all odds or especially now because, as you realize in various other parts of the world, digital transformation is here to stay. Digital transformation was before Corona, and Corona expedited everything. I want to mention one exit was Optimal Plus, which deals with the chip industry, was sold to National Instrument for $365 million. Not bad. Even better than that, Spot, which deals with cloud, was sold to NetApp for $450 million. And the last one, Moveit, which deals with transportation, smart transportation, was sold to Mobileye, which is now part of Intel, for $1 billion. Again, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. When you're part of the high-tech industry, this is fantastic news for you. When your restaurant or your hairdresser salon has been closed since the last 6 months, it's the worst of time. What does the future bring, Avi? I don't know. We may be able to discuss that on our next quarterly coffee in a few months. Thanks again for the invitation.
Thank you, Nir. That's very interesting. Even one of the companies that we interviewed in our program was just sold to a company in California. The sum is not so huge. It was $10 million, but so we were happy to see that company that was on our program also had to move. So Nir, thank you so much. And I think it gives a flavor of what's going on in Israel. And we will move to Toby that will tell us about what's going in the Blue Innovation in Rhode Island. Part of the program is to connect also to the other side as this program is recorded and will be sent to many people in Israel. So that will help to cement more relation. And Toby, it's all yours. Please tell us about what's going on in Newport and Blue Technology.
Well, great. Thanks, Avi, and thanks for having me on the program. I'm going to share a presentation and go through quickly an overview of something as Nir described, with the best of times, the worst of times. One of the sectors that has been growing and is still a bright spot in the economy of New England, at least, is marine technology or blue technology, as we call it. So I'm going to focus my presentation specifically on that and give everyone an overview of what's happening in southern New England, but really focus on Rhode Island. So thanks for inviting me on the show. And I should mention that not only am I a board member of the Greater Newport Chamber of Commerce, but I'm also one of the co-founders of the Blue Innovation Symposium, which is the largest blue technology conference, marine tech conference in New England. So I'll talk about that in a little bit. But first, what I thought would make sense is to define what the blue economy means, just so that we're on the same page. Talk about the regional importance, and then specifically why it's important to Rhode Island. And then a focus on the existing and emerging industries, because I think there's opportunities for cross-border collaboration here, especially when you look at blue tech, as we call it, in New England is really focused on the defense tech or the defense industry, and the Navy obviously drives a lot of what happens in New England. And so I believe that there's some opportunities in that sector, and especially in software as it relates to blue tech. And that includes data analytics, cybersecurity, and so on. So we'll talk about that in a moment. But first, what do we mean when we say the blue economy? Because different regions define the blue economy differently. So here, broadly, the blue economy is labeled as economic activity that's tied to the water. In Rhode Island, that means defense, marine sensors and robotics, offshore wind, aquaculture, tourism, shipbuilding, sailing, seafood processing, research, and education. What I'm going to focus on is the blue technology side of things, which blue tech, which is the defense, the sensors, and the vehicles, drives not only the development of the defense tech sector and startups in that space, but it drives a second tier of industry. And that second tier of industry in Rhode Island includes the machine shops with the capability of building things that are going to go deep into the water, the composite manufacturers. For many of you, or for some of you, if you know Rhode Island, you know that we have a rich history in sailing, especially with the America's Cup. And because of that, there is a composites industry that is really world-class. And so we're seeing the composites industry diversify into things like underwater vehicles or supporting underwater vehicles. Sensor manufacturers, that includes sensors. And in fact, there's a Rhode Island company called Far Sounder that makes forward-looking sonar systems that are sold to navies and cruise lines around the world, or shipbuilders around the world. And then you've got design firms, research institutions, and more. And I would argue that Rhode Island has one of the densest and most diverse blue technology or economies in the entire world, never mind in the United States. So how important is the blue economy to Rhode Island? The short answer is very important. And when we look at a recent study by the University of Rhode Island, approximately 4.6% of the state's total economy is tied to the ocean. And when we look at employment, there's roughly 43,000 workers in Rhode Island who are, tied to the ocean, but specifically blue tech. When we look at General Dynamics, Electric Boat, who are building out, traditional submarines and submarine systems, the Naval Undersea Warfare Center, and all of the major defense contractors that have offices in Rhode Island, that employment has an effect on southern New England, not just the Rhode Island ecosystem. So we see employees coming in from Connecticut and nearby Massachusetts to fill, again, roles that run from welders all the way up to high technology design, engineering, and so on. So 4.3 billion of that activity is related to defense alone. And then 2.6 is the broader, ocean economy, so tourism and so on. And one of the leading sectors I'm actually going to focus on in just a couple of slides is offshore energy, specifically offshore wind. And that is expected to drive the development of approximately 17,000 jobs over the next 10 years. So it's one of the bright spots in the economy here. And research is ongoing. The University of Rhode Island and other universities in southern New England, not just in Rhode Island, are looking at the importance of the ocean to their economies. So highlights, defense leads the way. Right now in the marine tech, blue tech sector, defense and really the Navy and the Office of Naval Research and the Naval Undersea Warfare Center are really driving technological change as well as business when it comes to the defense industry and those supporting industries in Rhode Island and beyond. And if you look at Newport, Middletown, and Portsmouth, which make up Aquidneck Island in the state of Rhode Island, you'll find that most of the major defense contractors, from Raytheon Technologies, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, SAIC, and others, have offices on Aquidneck Island. And then in Rhode Island in general, you've got companies like XBlue, which is a French sensor company that their US headquarters is in Providence, and others that have chosen to be in Rhode Island. So, and I would be remiss if I didn't remind everyone that Rhode Island's state slogan is the ocean state. So the ocean, the ocean is very important to the state. And research, the other thing that's driving technology development in the state is the University of Rhode Island, both through their Graduate School of Oceanography and their College of Engineering. So when we look at Rhode Island, the University of Rhode Island, it's driving traditional ocean research and technological developments through their College of Engineering. And Bob Ballard, who discovered the wreck of the Titanic, is also associated with the university. So quickly, what are the new developments? Offshore wind. The US, the United States, has been slow to look at offshore wind until recently. But now offshore wind stands to create a significant impact on the Northeast. First, we have the first offshore wind farm off the coast of Rhode Island, off the coast of Block Island, and which is up and operational. The governor of Rhode Island, who has now been tapped by President Biden to be Commerce Secretary last year, she committed to the state being 100% powered by renewable energy by the end of the decade, so by 2030. And BOEM, the Bureau of Energy Management, leased $405 million worth of leases to offshore wind developers to develop 3 offshore wind farms off the coast of southern New England. And so that led to Ørsted, one of the large wind companies, to develop in Rhode Island, or to launch a innovation center, which is encouraging startups to land here in the state and develop technology that will both support and lead to efficiencies, greater power production efficiencies and so on in the offshore wind space. And that's having an effect. The offshore wind farms will have an effect on the broader economic landscape by driving the universities to develop training programs, educational programs, which they have already started to do. The community colleges in the Rhode Island have already stood up training programs around this. And port development. There are 3 ports, 2 in Rhode Island, that are looking at developing capabilities and functionalities to support the wind industry. And in Newport alone, there's 2 organizations, the Blue Innovation Symposium, which we moved to Newport 2 years ago to support this growing and sort of exploding blue tech sector in New England, and especially with the epicenter being in Newport. The Blue Innovation Symposium is now the largest blue technology conference in New England, and it's a global conference. This year, we obviously had to run the program virtually, but we had over 200 participants this year and roughly 7 countries represented. And again, I think an opportunity to connect with Israel for the next conference. And Innovate Newport is a technology incubator that was developed with the help of the state of Rhode Island, the city of Newport, and the Navy. So Innovate Newport is a traditional incubator with space, co-working space, and function huddle rooms and function space to hold conferences and things like that, that obviously over the last year has been challenged with COVID-19, but today is home to a number of blue tech startups. So what are the takeaways? The takeaways are the region has one of the densest and most diverse marine tech ecosystems in the world. Defense really leads the way, but it's diversifying into areas like environmental monitoring and better understanding the ocean's effect on climate change and climate change's effect on the ocean. And we've got key assets in the defense sector, such as the Naval Undersea Warfare Center, Naval Station Newport, and the Naval War College, and support organizations like the Southern New England Defense Industry Association, which serves as an educational resource and a convener of many of those big and small defense contractors. And then emerging opportunities in offshore wind, power and battery systems are really going to drive the sector, cybersecurity, and data analytics. So again, thanks, Avi, for inviting me. Feel free to, if you want more information about the Blue Innovation Symposium, blueinnovationsymposium.com, and feel free to reach out to me at toby@tobystapleton.com. Thanks.
Thank you, Toby, for the presentation. Thank you, Nir, for your presentation. Thank you, Inon, for your presentation. And I think what we done here, we exposed both the connection between Israel and Rhode Island. And I want to mention on the blue technologies that University of Rhode Island is working for a long time with the Israeli Underwater Authority in Caesarea in research and not necessarily just the archaeology part, but developing of technology. Definitely the Israel-Rhode Island connection is growing, and I'm sure we'll have more news in our next program, May 13. Also, I just want to mention March 1st, we have a program with the Bird Foundation, again, with the Chamber of Commerce of Newport, and we'll present a company called eConcrete that developed the technology for concrete for marine, and we already connected them with Rhode Island. So I want to thank you in Tel Aviv, New York, Newport, and from Providence, Rhode Island, and we appreciate the participation of our audience and, of course, the speakers. Thank you, and Laila Tov to those in Israel, and good night here in Rhode Island. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night.